This week's Study Hall is coming to you from the Revision 3 studio green screen, because I'm meta. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Max Scoville Study Hall. I'm your host, Max Scoville, and Study Hall is the show where I usually take a particular video game or video games and typically run down a selection of pop culture that I would recommend to keep you entertained that's similar to that video game. But today, we're doing something weird and different. I'm going to answer some questions that you guys asked me. If for whatever reason this is your first time watching Study Hall, please, by all means, go back and watch the other episodes because this one is a bad first impression. It's hardly indicative of the regular series. I'll be honest, part of the reason for this very informal episode, I'm not even wearing shoes. It's summer. I'm gonna go on vacation for the first time ever in Hawaii, where I've never been, and I'm really excited about it. I'm leaving like tomorrow night, so we're kind of phoning it in. But I do also love the fact that we have the opportunity to communicate with our audiences here on the internet. People always say, don't read the comments, or don't feed the trolls, but that's kind of like saying, sometimes there are rude teenagers at the mall. We shouldn't ever go to the mall. The whole reason the internet was created was for the sake of communication, and sure, sometimes there are rude teenagers at the mall and on the internet, but avoiding communication isn't going to change that, and trying to pretend that YouTube is just regular TV is a waste of an amazing resource. So this is me communicating with you guys and answering your questions, having a good old heart-to-heart teen rap sesh. Of course, we didn't plan this far enough ahead, so a lot of these questions were just pulled from Twitter. There's a ton of games I know you guys keep requesting. For example, Good Friends Forever asks, Max, will you ever do a study hall for Cyberpunk 2077? Yes, of course. I will absolutely do an episode for Cyberpunk 2077. I'm so stoked about that game, but it's not slated for release until 2015, and we know very little about it right now, aside from the fact that it's based on a popular pen and paper role-playing game, which you could go play, you know. Cyberpunk is actually my favorite subgenre of science fiction, and I'm really excited about CD Projekt Red's game about it, but it's just too early to tell. So in the meantime, if you want to get into Cyberpunk, I recommend you go check out the episode of Study Hall I did about Remember Me, which everything in there is Cyberpunk. It all totally applies to Cyberpunk 2077, so just go watch that and take some notes, read some books, watch some anime. Adam asked on Twitter, The Division. What can hold my interest for a while and wait for it? And there's another game that is over a year away, so I don't want to do a full episode on it just yet because I don't really know what we're in for. But in the meantime, definitely go check out the comic DMZ by Brian Wood. It takes place during present-day American Civil War with New York being a demilitarized zone. So it's basically a no man's land and everyone's kind of wandering around the streets of New York like, what are we doing here? Very similar vibe to what we saw in that E3 demo of The Division. Watchdogs is another game that is in high demand that will also get its own episode, but I still haven't really gotten up close and personal with that game, so I'm not really quite sure what I would put in the episode. In the meantime, go watch or rewatch the late and great Tony Scott's 1998 thriller, Enemy of the State. It is a seriously underrated movie, especially considering how ahead of its time it was. Or if you want to get really hyped for Watchdogs, you could read the news, because scary things happen. El Bubbly Dingus and Lex Valentine on YouTube and Dragon Mage Drake on Twitter all asked about Hotline Miami, and they are just a few of the people who have been requesting I talk about that. I'm actually playing Hotline Miami on my Vita right now, and I'm absolutely loving it. And with a sequel just around the corner, I think a full episode is very likely. But for now, I would say my most obvious suggestion is the movie Drive, if you haven't already seen that. That's a fun movie. Very, very slick, very 80s. Also, go check out the album Outrun by Kavinsky, who did some of the music for the Drive soundtrack. It is an awesome 80s synth-heavy concept album about a ghost in a Letterman jacket who drives around in a magic Ferrari in Malibu. And part of me really hopes that the next project from the Hotline Miami guys somehow involves Kavinsky, or at least magical ghost cars. I don't know. I can dream. Simon on Twitter asked a great question that's a little less specific. What is the best title or property to have transitioned from another medium to games, and vice versa? There have been so many things that have been adapted into games that's kind of a tough call to make. Lucasarts, rest in peace, did some really amazing Star Wars games that kind of grew up along with the Star Wars franchise. But one of my favorites of theirs is actually their old point-and-click Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. I think it does a really amazing job of translating all the humor and fun and sense of discovery from the Indiana Jones movies into a game that's not just strictly about punching and shooting dudes, for which we have Uncharted, obviously. On the flip side, and I'm probably going to get some hate for this, I think Some of the best games to be adapted into other mediums are fighting games, and I firmly believe that Mortal Kombat is the best video game movie made to date, which maybe says something about how easy it is to adapt video games into movies. The original Street Fighter II anime is awesome as well, and I think the reason that both of these work is because fighting games don't have linear story structures or clearly defined protagonists. They're just casts of characters with different backgrounds and motivations who are sort of expected to fight each other at some point, so there's actually some wiggle room for writers to get creative with it. On a related note, Agent09 on Twitter asked, what are some games that had quality novelizations and/or comic books after the game release? Also, opinions on the Last of Us comic book. I haven't checked out the Last of Us comic. I looked it up online. It's Dark Horse is publishing it, and it's about what Ellie was doing before she wound up meeting Joel. However, I did check out Assassin's Creed The Fall and its sequel, The Chain, which I enjoyed quite a bit in spite of never really falling in love with the Assassin's Creed games. This series is about an assassin in 19th century Russia, and if you've ever even been like mildly curious about Assassin's Creed, I would actually recommend checking it out because it's kind of a good primer for the whole Animus series thing with the Templars and the Assassins. Now, before we go, I figured I would answer a couple questions about myself that I get asked quite a lot. The first is from XX on YouTube, who asks, "Hi, Professor. I'd like to ask how tall you are. You seem like a pretty tall dude. Are you tall?" I am somewhere between 6'5" and 6'7". I'm not really sure exactly because a few of the times I've gotten measured at the doctor's office, the nurse had to go get a little stepladder and climb up that to measure me, so I don't know how accurate those measurements are. But yes, I guess you could say that I am tall. It is not Anthony and Adam and Tara that are short. It is me that is tall. Second, IGN's Scott Lowe asked the big question. What mussing product do you use to keep your hair so perfectly mussed? The man writes for a living, dear Lord. The answer to that question is Axe Whatever Messy Paste. Maybe someday I will do a proper video tutorial on how I give myself Dragon Ball Z hair every day, but the big trick is that I dry it with a hairdryer first. That makes a huge difference if you're trying to get a particular look, as opposed to just getting it out of the shower and rubbing crap in it. But that's my hair. I have different hair from everybody else, because we're all different organisms, so different products are for different people. But the hairdryer is a big tip, and I told you how I did my hair, so go and conquer with that information. But yeah, as I said, this has been a very lax and informal study hall, and if you stuck around for the whole thing while I talked about my hair and how tall I am, I appreciate it, and don't worry, I will have another normal episode next week in honor of Batman and Arkham Origins. We can talk all about the Caped Crusader and the Dark Knight, Batman. Class dismissed, everybody. I'm gonna go to Hawaii now. Check it out. Aloha. Yeah?